She grew up unloved, unseen, and unprotected. Forced into a marriage with a man she didn't know, she expected more pain, but he showed her kindness and then disappeared. Alone and broken, she waited until a black SUV pulled up. Inside was a letter that would change her life forever. Kate's life had always been a quiet tragedy tucked into the dusty folds of a forgotten village. After losing both her parents to illness before she turned 10, she was handed over to her stepmother, Mama Ada, a woman known not for kindness, but for cruelty, wrapped in expensive lace and painted lips. Mama Ada had 2 daughters of her own, who lounged around all day in silk wrappers, while Kate, the orphaned stepchild, washed their clothes, cooked their meals, and slept on a mat near the firewood shed. Every morning began with shouting, and every night ended with silence and tears. The villagers pitied her in whispers, but did nothing. When Mama Ada told her one day, "You are marrying that boy tomorrow," Kate didn't argue. She barely knew Kelvin, the soft-spoken carpenter who lived on the edge of the village. But in that moment, Kate saw the marriage as nothing more than a change in location, perhaps even a small escape. With no dowry, no ceremony, and no one truly celebrating, she was handed off like property. And as the sun set on her wedding night, Kate sat in a one-room house beside a man she hardly knew, wondering if this was her final punishment or the beginning of another cruel chapter. But Kelvin was not like the other men in the village. Though poor by appearance, he had a strange calmness that unsettled her. On their first night, when she wept quietly into her hands, he simply handed her a cup of warm water and said, "You can take the bed. I'll sleep on the mat." No demands, no expectations, just space. In the weeks that followed, he helped with chores, thanked her for every meal, even the burnt ones, and listened when she spoke. He never raised his voice, not even once. Yet there was a quiet sadness in his eyes, like he was carrying something heavier than poverty. Kate began to notice strange things. Kelvin would often leave before sunrise and return only after dark, sometimes covered in dust, sometimes in clean clothes, smelling faintly of expensive cologne. Men in suits occasionally visited, never staying long, always respectful. He took phone calls outside, speaking in a tone she had never heard from him before. When she asked him where he was going or who he was speaking with, he would only say, "I'm working on something, just trust me." But how could she trust a man who lived like a ghost? And then, one night, he didn't come home at all. The next morning, the house was eerily quiet. Kate sat on the edge of the bed, her hands trembling. She waited all day, cooking his favorite yam porridge, hoping he would walk through the door with a tired smile and a silly excuse. But by nightfall, reality settled in. Kelvin was gone. Days turned into weeks. The villagers began to talk. She drove him away, some said. Even poor men don't want her, others whispered. Mama Ada visited the house once, not to comfort her, but to laugh. "I gave you to a nobody, and even he left you. Maybe now you'll understand you were born to serve, not to be loved," she sneered. Kate said nothing. She had no strength left for words. Every evening, she sat by the door and watched the road that led out of the village. Every rustle of the wind, every cart that rolled by, made her heart jump. But Kelvin never returned. Hunger crept in. Her savings dried up. And yet, she refused to go back to Mama Ada. She would rather starve in that lonely house than return to a place where her spirit was crushed. But just as she began to give up, fate knocked, literally. One hot afternoon, a black SUV rolled into the village, its tires kicking up clouds of dust. Children ran behind it, shouting. No one had ever seen a car that clean, in Olonla. It stopped in front of Kate's house, and a man in a dark suit stepped out. "Mrs. Kate Kelvin?" he asked. She nodded, stunned. He handed her a sealed envelope, bowed, and returned to the vehicle. Inside the envelope was a note, handwritten. "If you still trust me, come. Everything you've ever prayed for is waiting." The SUV door swung open. Her heart raced. She had nothing but the wrapper on her waist, no bag, no explanation. But somehow, she climbed in. The journey was long. The dusty roads gave way to paved highways. Trees turned into tall buildings. Her eyes widened with every mile. They finally stopped before a mansion so grand it seemed pulled from a dream. Fountains, glass towers, golden gates. The driver opened the door. "He's waiting inside," he said. And there, in the center of the glittering palace, stood Kelvin. But this Kelvin wasn't the quiet carpenter. He was clean-shaven, dressed in a suit worth more than her stepmother's house. He smiled and said, "Kate, welcome home." Kate stood frozen in the doorway, her eyes darting from the marble floors to the grand chandelier hanging above her head. The silence was heavier than any scolding she had received in Mama Eda's house. "What is this?" she whispered, barely able to speak. Kelvin walked forward, took her hand gently, and said, "I wanted to tell you so many times, but I needed to know who you were when you thought I had nothing. You see, Kate, I'm not just a carpenter. I'm the heir to one of the largest real estate empires in the country." Her knees buckled slightly, and he caught her. "I've lived a life of lies, of people wanting me for my name, my money. When I met you, I needed to escape it all. I bought that little house and started over. No money, no bodyguards, no cameras, just me. And you never asked for anything. You gave without knowing who I was. That's the kind of love that can't be bought." Kate covered her mouth as tears spilled down her face. You mean, all this time, you were testing me?" Kelvin nodded. "I was praying you'd be real, and you were." In the weeks that followed, Kate's world turned upside down. She moved into the mansion and was introduced to staff, lawyers, and board members who all bowed when she entered her room. The same girl who once swept ashes in silence now signed documents in boardrooms with golden pens. But despite the wealth, the cars, and the opulence, Kate remained grounded. She remembered every insult from Mama Ada, every blister from walking miles to fetch water. Every night she cried herself to sleep, and she vowed never to forget. When Kelvin suggested they start a charity for orphaned girls, she immediately agreed. "Let's build something real," she told him. They built schools, gave scholarships, and funded clinics in rural areas. One day, Mama Ada appeared at their gates, begging for forgiveness. She had fallen on hard times, and her daughters had abandoned her. Kate listened quietly. She did not shout, she did not curse. She simply said, "I forgive you, but I won't forget." And as Mama Ada wept on the marble floor, Kate turned away, not out of spite, but because she had finally made peace with the girl she used to be. Kate's story spread across tabloids and social media. They called her the village wife who became a queen. They called her. Influencers begged for interviews. Designers gifted her gowns. But no amount of spotlight could outshine the quiet pride in Kelvin's eyes whenever he looked at her. "You see now," he would whisper when they were alone, "why I had to find someone like you." She had grown into her grace, not because of the wealth, but because of how she used it. When they traveled to international galas, she always wore a piece of home, beaded necklaces made by village artisans, wrappers, From the market, she used to walk to barefoot. She never let the world erase where she came from. One night, as they stood on the balcony of their penthouse overlooking the city lights, Kelvin took her hand and said, "You turned my hiding place into a kingdom." She smiled and leaned her head on his shoulder. "And you turned my curse into a blessing," she replied. They stood there in silence, not needing words, just the soft breeze and the knowledge that against all odds, they had found each other. But life wasn't perfect. It never is. There were days of doubt, arguments, even tears, but each trial only made them stronger. Kate learned to sit in boardrooms filled with men who doubted her and earned their respect. She learned to speak at conferences, to command rooms with stories of where she started and where she now stood. She became a voice for young girls across the nation, proof that kindness, patience, and faith could build empires. Kelvin never stopped working either. Together, they expanded their businesses, employing thousands. Yet, every Sunday, they returned to Olonla, not in convoys, but in a simple car, walking hand in hand through the same market where Kate once begged for leftover tomatoes. The villagers bowed now, not out of fear, but out of respect. And every time someone asked her how she did it, she would smile and say, "I just married a poor man." She never added the rest of the sentence, because by now, the whole world knew he was no ordinary man. Kate often sat in the garden, watching their children play. Her daughter, Amara, had her smile. Her son, Toby, had Kelvin's eyes. She thought about the night she almost ran away from that one-room house, when Kelvin was quiet and distant, and she had nothing but fear in her heart. She was glad she stayed. She was glad she trusted. The secret Kelvin had kept, his wealth, could have destroyed them. But instead, it brought out the truth in her. She had loved a man, not his bank account. She had served, not knowing she was being watched. And in doing so, she passed a test she didn't even know she was taking. Sometimes, she told her children, life gives you wrapped gifts that look like burdens. Open them anyway. You never know what's inside. Her children nodded, even if they didn't fully understand. One day, they would. And so, the girl who once had nothing became the woman who had everything. But her greatest treasure wasn't the mansion, the cars, or the fame. It was knowing that love, in its purest form, had found her and never let her go. Kelvin still looked at her the same way he did on the day he gave her the bed and took the mat. And even now, years later, she still cooked him burnt stew, sometimes on purpose, just to watch him laugh and say, "Delicious. Tastes like smoky love." They didn't need fairy tales anymore. They had written their own.